Fantastic. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. We'll get started, and I'll just give you a couple of housekeeping things before we get into the details on some flavor compounds. So this session is being recorded. That means that I'm recording myself and the PowerPoint presentation. I won't be recording your screens or voices, and they should be on mute anyway. But it does mean that whenever you ask a question, I might read that out in the presentation, and that might appear in the recording. Okay, so just something to be aware of. This will be released onto my YouTube channel later on as well. So the whole webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded as such. If you're interested in the PowerPoint slides that I'm using during this presentation, I will share a link at the end of the webinar, and you can access those. It's via my website, actually. Now, we'll be talking about flavor compounds and how they originate in wine, but also you have the opportunity to try and identify those. And I know some of you are joining in with a sampling kit. And just a couple of things to set up. I'm going to ask you to use a couple of glasses, and I recommend at least 3, and they should be identical. They can be any shape or size. I'm using some ISO tasting glasses myself. And the samples that I'm sending out come in either of 2 formats. It's either going to be vials that look like these, which contain wines, and they're all ready to taste. So the compounds that we'll be discussing are pre-added, very convenient option. All you need to do is open that vial and then pour it into the glass like this. Okay. Now, the other option you have is it is a set of aromatic compounds that looks like this. So they contain vials that you can use to make your own flavor additions. Okay. And for that to work, you will need to pour some neutral wine into your glasses. I'm using this really convenient automatic pouring spout, by the way, which pours 50 milliliters of wine, which is what you need to prepare these samples. And then I'm going to ask you to go ahead and pick up vial number 1 and vial number 2. And you're going to want to squeeze the hat of the vial like this. There's a pipette inside, which pulls up some liquid. And you can use that to make a flavor addition just above your glass of wine. Okay, like that. Just empty the whole content of the pipette into the glass. And then you're going to move on to number 2 and repeat that with the next glass as well. Okay, so squeeze the hat. It will pull up some liquid. You're going to use that above some other glass like that. So now you're ready to go. You've made your first 2 flavor additions to these glasses, and you've also kept a glass like this, which is untreated. Okay, so you're going to want to have 1 glass which does not contain any aroma additions. Right, now that is out of the way. I know many of you are joining in dry as well, so no need to have the samples in order to learn something here and enjoy. Okay, my name is Sietse Wijman. I'm the founder of The Art of Tasting. And The Art of Tasting is a wine education company that revolves around presenting wines with added aromatic compounds. I have a master in sensory science, and sensory science is the study of flavor perception. Okay, so it's the academic study of the senses of smell and taste. I have my level 4 diploma in wines, and I'm also an advanced cicerone. Okay, so that's a brief introduction of myself. And so one of the aims of the courses I give is becoming better at tasting. And it really is about like detecting aroma compounds, also recognizing them and then communicating them to others. And during my first wine tasting experience, I was surrounded by a group of experts who claimed that the wine that was in front of us had an aroma of green bell pepper. And as a wine novice, I asked the obvious question, like, does the winemaker add any green bell pepper to the wine? Do they use some kind of extract to get all of these aromas in there? And as we understand now, that is not the case. And all of these wine aromas, they form during the grape growing process or the winemaking process. So that was very interesting to me. And I delved into the science of it, which looks like this. So don't be scared about seeing all of these aromatic compounds. It's not the the point of this is not to recognize these molecules or compounds, but I want to illustrate a principle here, which is that whenever you come across a smell in daily life, it could be the smell of a green bell pepper or red wine or lavender or tea, you name it. It always consists of many different aromatic compounds, which is illustrated by this slide. So this would be what a chemical analysis of a green bell pepper aroma looks like, okay? So it's about 20 different compounds that together, they are picked up by your nose and recognized as being the smell of a green bell pepper. And the same is true for wine. So whenever you run an analysis of what comes out of a glass of wine, so whatever compounds volatilize from wine, you will always run into a few dozens of different compounds. And not all of these compounds are unique to each other. And as highlighted here, we have got an aroma similarity here, and which is a compound belonging to the pyrazines family. Anyway, this is the reason why we associate wine with other aromas that we come across in our lives, okay? Because there are going to be one or more aromatic compounds that are overlapping, okay, that they have in common. Not just true for wine, it always is also the reason why, for example, we can taste a coffee, it makes us think of chocolate. It is because one or more aromatic molecules are going to be shared, okay? Now, today we'll talk about 10 of such examples. So 10 aroma compounds that are found both in wine and in other sources in nature, be it fruits, be it vegetables, or flowers, for example, okay? Now, the first sample that I'm introducing to you is the green bell pepper aroma. And if you're tasting with us, then I encourage you to start off with the base red wine. So a neutral red wine that you've chosen, and smell that. And then you're going to move on to the glass number 1, where you've made an aroma addition. And that is going to have a very noticeable green bell pepper smell, because we've made an addition of a compound, of that compound belonging to the pyrazines family that I was just showing to you. And the fascinating thing about these aroma molecules, they do not have a predefined smell, okay? So what this data shows you is some descriptors that I've collected during training courses that I've run in person. So I've presented everyone with the same sample with that added compound, and I've asked the group, tell me what you're smelling in this particular glass. And this is the result of about 20 tasters. So what you see on top is that about 16 out of those 20 tasters, they will say, I can indeed smell a green bell pepper in this glass. But that's not the only descriptor you could be picking up here. There's also the tomato leaves descriptor, which comes a close second. So about half of the people that say, well, I can smell tomato leaves. And they're not wrong, because whenever you're, say, walking into a greenhouse and there is those tomatoes growing on the vine, and you can smell those green parts, so the stems and the leaves, it releases the same smell. And indeed, chemical analysis has confirmed that those plants also contain the same compound. So I think this is a very valid descriptor. Asparagus, or green asparagus, specifically jalapeno, there's something earthy about this smell. Cut grass, so very green in nature, like green beans, similarly, specifically uncooked green beans, okay, the unboiled ones, and then coffee beans before they are roasted, they also contain this compound. If you haven't already, I'd encourage you to taste these wines. And indeed, all of these samples are safe to smell and to taste. So we're going to start with the reference wine, which is the one with no added compound. And then you want to move on to the next glass, which has the compound added. And of course, a spittoon is very useful for the purpose of this sample. Have a glass of water with you to taste in between samples as well. And you notice that the green bell pepper aroma that you have smelled before is then coming through on the palate as well. Okay? Now, moving on to what this particular compound is doing in wine. And this is a so-called primary aroma. And primary aromas and flavors are those that form either in the grape or during fermentation. And the unique thing about this green bell pepper smell, which is caused by the following compound, isobutylmethoxypyrazine, so that's on the top left of the slide. It is formed in a grape, and when grapes are ripening, you would actually be able to notice that aroma and flavor in the grape itself. And that is pretty unique. It doesn't happen with a lot of wine flavors. And as you intuitively know, grape and grape juice has a very different flavor profile from the wine made with them. So there's a lot of conversions and chemical processes happening during the winemaking that turns grapes into something completely different, basically. But this is a very stable aroma. So that means that it's produced by the grape and it survives fermentation, it survives aging, and it can be noticed in a finished wine. And there's a set of grape varieties that that feature this flavor prominently. And in the context of red wine, which we'll be talking about today, it's Cabernet Sauvignon, Carmenère, and also Cabernet Franc. So those are the three main grape varieties that produce the highest levels of the green bell pepper flavor. But there's also other varieties like Pinot Noir that don't produce it at all. Okay, but let's focus on Cabernet Sauvignon for now and talk about a couple of factors that determine how much of this aroma is formed. And we see the more shady the conditions are in the vineyards, as well as the lower the temperatures, the more of that green bell pepper flavor is retained. Okay, so if you are picking a bit earlier, you will also get more of the green bell pepper flavor. Okay, it's connected to ripeness. I'm also showing the production process of red winemaking specific on this slide. So starting with a grape reception, I'm not going to go over these in detail, but in bold are the steps that are compulsory, so that always must happen in the production of red wines. And then in italics are the steps that are more optional, so that are more stylistic choices of the winemaker. There's also the flavor icon here, the molecular structure, and pyrazines always contain these nitrogen elements in the molecular formula. Okay, there's the detection threshold there as well, which I will come back to in a little bit, what actually the detection threshold is. And let me pull up the results from this beautiful study, which has looked at the pattern of green bell pepper ripening. And as you may know, the green bell pepper is basically an underripe version of a red bell pepper. So what this study did, they analyzed the green bell pepper and looked at how much of this compound was present in the original green bell pepper, and they followed it during ripening. And then what you can see is when it turns into a red bell pepper, yes, that compound is still present, the isobutylmethoxypyrazine, but at much lower levels. And we see a similar pattern when we look at grape ripening. Okay, so let me pull up this plot that I've made, and it contains more than one aroma compound. But for now, I'll make you follow the light blue line, which is the pattern of isobutylmethoxypyrazine. And when the grapevine started flowering, so at pretty much the onset of fruit, it forms straight away, and then during ripening it gradually builds off. Okay, and that is different from what you see with many other grape aromas, which typically develop a bit later in the ripening cycle. Okay, so you need much riper grapes to get some aromas like elderflower, rose, and black pepper, which are demonstrated here. Black pepper we'll talk about in a little bit as well. Now, on the detection threshold, which is in nanograms per liter, it's 8 nanograms per liter. That is a very low number, and you might not have heard of nanograms before, but you will know milligrams. Now, 1 milligram, that is more or less a sugar granule, so that is already a pretty low quantity. But a nanogram is a millionth of a milligram. Okay, you're still with me? It is a millionth of a sugar granule that we're looking at here that contributes such obvious green bell pepper aromas to wine. So another way of putting this is into a volume percentage. Now, your wine might contain, give or take, 12% alcohol, but if you look at the percentage of added pyrazine, it is a ridiculously low number with a lot of zeros, which illustrates that as human beings, we are extremely sensitive to some of those aroma compounds, but comparatively, we're not all that sensitive to some of the other compounds, okay? So extremely wide sensitivity ranges here. And the threshold, anything above 8 nanograms per liter in wine is usually picked up by majority of the population. The addition that we've done here is 35 ng, so that's well above the detection threshold, should be fairly noticeable, okay? Let's move on to sample number 2, and you have already done the aroma addition yourself. Now, if you are rewatching this when you're watching from YouTube, you can pause the video here and try to work out what you're smelling in glass number 2 before I reveal what it is. Just to keep the pace of this webinar a bit higher, I'm just going to go forward and reveal what the second sample is. You can always watch it back, which is the smell of banana. And that is a very sort of artificial smell you're picking up here. So not necessarily a natural banana smell, but very much a synthetic banana. There's also a bit of a bubblegum character in this smell. Pear drops, which is a type of British candy, which is flavored with the same compound. And then there's something slightly solventy about this as well. Compound's called isoamyl acetate. It is the acetate group of the compound that is sort of responsible for that solventy character. But let's have a look actually at what real bananas smell and taste like. Now, just a little bit of history of this compound. This was first identified a long time ago. We're talking about the 19th century. And immediately, the compound was isolated, it was produced on a large scale, and it was used in confectionery. It was a very popular compound. And people at the time, when they smelled and tasted it, they thought, it doesn't really smell all that synthetic. Actually, it's a very natural banana smell. So back in the day, people's perception were different. And in order to understand that, you have to know that back then, there was a different banana variety available on the market, which was called Gros Michel. It looks like this. And there is an issue with this. This is like a banana variety, but this was pretty much wiped out in like the 1940s, 50s, because of a disease called the Panama disease. And the Panama disease is a type of fungal disease that destroys this type of banana. And this was a huge issue because there weren't any bananas available at the time. And the solution was to come up with a different variety, the Cavendish variety, which had resistance to the Panama disease. And this is the reason that pretty much the whole banana industry is dominated by this one variety, this Cavendish variety, which has resistance to Panama disease. Anyway, these two bananas were later compared in terms of their isoamyl acetate content. And what they found is indeed higher levels of the isoamyl acetate in the Gros Michel. So whenever you're smelling this sample, or whenever you're tasting pear drops, or you're trying a Beaujolais Nouveau, which I'll get to in a bit, it is actually the aroma of what the banana used to smell and taste like 100 years ago. Okay? Now, moving on to what this is doing in wine. It is produced during yeast during fermentation. And this is an aroma compound that belongs to a class of molecules called the esters, okay? And a class that's basically like a family or a group of molecules. And what most esters have in common is a fruity character. And esters, they're found at very low levels in the grape, so it's not necessarily connected to specific varieties, but yeast produces quite a few of them. So this is a fermentation character, but in the context of red wine, you find especially high levels when you're using the technique carbonic maceration. And I think you will have heard of that. It's basically you're picking up whole grape clusters from the vineyard and you're moving that into a vessel, which you then flush with carbon dioxide. Now, what that does is your whole grapes will be suffocated. They will be excluded from any oxygen. That results in several conversions in the grape. But most importantly, you're getting wines from those grapes that have high color, quite low tannin, and fruity flavors. And those properties make wines that have gone through carbonic maceration very suitable for youthful, like they're youthful wines. They're meant for early consumption. They're you can drink it in substantial quantities. Let's put it that way. And the famous example that's a benchmark example of that is the Beaujolais, and especially the Nouveau. Okay, goes through carbonic maceration, features high banana flavors, especially when it's combined with a yeast strain, also known as 71B. Okay, so you can Google that in the future if you want. You will get some suppliers that give that particular yeast strain known to produce extreme levels of that banana smell. The other style that you might see this in is in Pinotage. So this is a grape variety that even if it is produced without carbonic maceration, it will still show a little bit of isoamyl acetate. And even, so that is especially the younger style of Pinotage. So no carbonic maceration needed. Typically, esters in general are a bit higher in white wines. These are fermented at lower temperatures, resulting in greater ester production. Threshold here is in 1.5 milligrams per liter, which is substantially higher than the previous compound that we've tried. So in comparison, we're less sensitive to this. I've tried to balance that in the tasting samples that I'm supplying. So this is a factor 8 to the detection threshold. Addition is about 12 milligrams per liter that we've done here. So on average, these added aromas should come across, give or take, the same intensity, but there will be some individual differences here. Okay. Let's move on to sample number 3. If you're tasting this with us, this is the time to make some glass space. So I'm going to empty those in my spittoon so that you are left with 2 empties. You can then go ahead and pour some new wine in those glasses and make your additions of 3 and 4. Okay, so those will be the next compounds that we'll be discussing. So I'm going to pick up the next 2 vials, 3, 4, and make the flavor additions. This might be a bit fast if you're tasting with us. There is also additional instruction videos on how to prepare these samples. I've made the flavor additions, and I'm going to move on to reveal what you could be smelling in number 3, which is the aroma of violet. So indeed, there's a very floral scent to this particular wine. And often there's not if you compare red wines with white wines, you don't get floral scents as much in red wines as in whites. And also the type of floral that you're getting is a bit different. So in, say, white wines, much more common to get rose aromas or like fresh floral aromas, maybe something like honeysuckle. This is a bit almost like more of a rich type of floral aroma. There's some secondary, there's some nuances to this. Raspberry, indeed, it has a little bit of a raspberry flavoring type of character. Turkish Delight, very suitable descriptor here. Much of Turkish Delight is flavored with floral type of flavorings. There's some kind of perfume-like aspect of this, which makes a lot of sense. Many perfumes are very floral. Dried chili pepper, especially the Scotch bonnet pepper, can make this aroma. Paprika, so the type of powder used in cooking. Nori and sweet potato are also descriptors here. Quite wide range of descriptors, but they can all feature this compound in more or less the same extent. I'll get back to that in a little bit. Let's talk about how this forms in wine, then talk about specific anosmia. Beta-ionone is formed actually mostly during alcoholic fermentation. It is derived from a compound belonging to the carotenoids. And the carotenoids are color pigments in wine. Now, this is an aroma that you get mostly in reds and not really in whites, because the color pigments that this is formed from, they are located in the skins. Now, as you know, skin contact is default by red winemaking, but it doesn't happen that often with white winemaking. So usually wine doesn't have the potential, in the case of white wines, to form that beta-ionone compound. So it's a conversion from the carotenoids into beta-ion. That is basically the chemical mechanism behind this. We know that the grape produces greater levels of color pigments if it is exposed to greater sunlight. That is true for every grape. So all grapes have the potential to form more of the violet compounds. And it's more of a thing where often New World regions are a bit located closer to the equator, greater sunlight intensity levels, okay? You might get more floral notes. Also, if you're growing grapes on an aspect which is favorable to the sun, for example, you get more of the color pigments, potentially more of that violet aroma. So this is a component that has been identified in most red wines. So it's not entirely sure. It's not completely understood why the violet scent is more noticeable in some wines than others. So it's mostly based on anecdotal evidence that varieties like Malbec and Pinot Noir can show this in a bit greater quantities. This is also an example of a compound which has a bit higher rates of specific anosmia, which is an interesting phenomenon. And basically, this indicates that you are insensitive to particular aromas. Now, anosmia, like on a more broader level, is the inability to smell. And that is unfortunate. And it happens, for example, if you have COVID or you have a cold, that would be considered generic anosmia, right? People who get older, for example, can also get anosmia. Specific anosmia is a lot more common. It means that you have a functioning sense of smell, but there's some specific aromas that you cannot pick up. And this is a pretty high incidence rate. It's about 25% of the population. So that's 1 out of 4 people that are insensitive to this particular violet smell. And that is what we see in our training courses as well. It's usually some people that are comfortable picking up all of the aromas that we're presenting, but then when they come to the violet scent, they're not really picking up any difference with the reference wine, okay? This is genetically determined. We're born with around 400 different olfactory receptors, but between people, there's going to be some variants. So some people might not be able to pick it up. They have a receptor lacking, so they might only be born with, say, 399 receptors, and other people will might have the full set and can actually pick up that violet smell. This is often likened to color blindness. So that means that when you're colorblind, your sense of vision is actually functioning fine. It's just that you're unable to pick up certain colors, okay? What we've also observed is typically independent of concentration. So even if we say you use your vial and you increase the level by putting an additional spike in your glass, it will still not smell of much to you at all, okay? This is, we're gonna skip this for now. And let's move on to number 4. Which I will reveal here. And we're going to talk about the eucalyptus character. Oops. Okay. Eucalyptus smell is defined by, obviously, its eucalyptus scent and some secondary characters such as bay leaf, cardamom. There is a bit of a toothpaste or mouthwash smell to it, and in cough syrup as well. These are products that often have eucalyptus as flavoring. Cinnamon, ginger, lily are also ways that you could describe this. And I want to show you this picture, which is actually by the Australian Wine Research Institute. It was taken in Australia, indeed. And this is a very common sight in Australia, nearby vineyards, okay? So you've got a range of eucalyptus trees on the left here. And then it's very close, you're only separated by a road. And then you have a vineyard over here. Now, if you've ever been near eucalyptus trees, you will know that these trees are extremely fragrant, okay? So if you'd be walking along this road, for example, pretty much all you'll be smelling is eucalyptus. And we know by now that this smell can actually spread and attach to ripening grapes. So whenever you are growing grapes here, it's simply the aroma molecule that's airborne from the trees and flies around and attaches to grape skins. If you use those grapes for winemaking, you will notice the eucalyptus smell in your finished wine. So it's a direct influence of the surroundings or the environment, which you could also consider terroir, that directly impacts grape flavor. This is only true for red wines because the aroma compound does not attach to all parts of the grape. It's only the outside, so the skins, and you do need skin contact. So in white wines where you're not using the skins, you will also not get any aroma transfer. You will not get that eucalyptus being extracted from the skins during winemaking. The eucalyptus tree is native to Australia, and indeed many famous Australian wines, including those from Coonawarra, for example, they can have a noticeable eucalyptus flavor from the presence of those trees. You also see them in Chile quite a bit. There's also commercial plantings of eucalyptus trees, so they'll grow entire forests for the purpose of getting eucalyptus oil. We see that the closer the vines are to the tree, the greater the effect is, and the threshold is about 50 meters. So like any vines that are grown closer than 50 meters to the tree will get the eucalyptus flavor. Further away, and the effect is not there. So that means that even within a single vineyard, you're going to get quite some variation from vine to vine in how much eucalyptus there is. Usually that is dealt with blending, so the winemaker can decide how much of the eucalyptus character they want in their finished wine by blending higher eucalyptus grapes with lower ones. Some winemakers do not like that effect at all, and they're very aware of this effect, and they will deliberately chop down nearby trees to prevent such flavor transfer. Okay, so a pretty interesting mechanism by there's not that many plants that can affect flavor directly like the eucalyptus can. It's also a compound that sorry for the slightly scary picture over here, but this is an illustration of what is called the trigeminal nerve. And eucalyptol, which is the name of the aroma molecule causing eucalyptus aroma, it also triggers the trigeminal nerve. This is a nerve that runs through our face and has 3 different branches, and that's why it's called trigeminal. It has several functions, including operating facial muscles, but it can also be used to pick up some sensations that don't quite fit into the sense of smell or the sense of taste. Okay, and I've listed a couple of examples here. So the cooling effect of eucalyptol, as well as menthol, for example, that is all picked up by the trigeminal nerve. Here are some more examples, such as that stinging sensation you get of vinegar, the warming sensation of alcohol, the heat from chili, etc. And even if you have a cold, or for whatever reason you're not smelling, or even rare if you're not tasting at all, this system will still be active, okay? So you will still pick up all of these sensations. It's useful to be aware of that particular system. And let's move on to sample number 5. So actually, we're going to have to make another change. So we're going to empty those glasses 3 and 4 and pour some new red wine. We'll make the flavor additions. So that will be 5 and 6. So you're going to want to pick that up from your kit. And another 2 vials. We'll make the additions 5 and 6. Just one squeeze of the pipette. Okay, let's go. Because number 5 is the smell of black pepper. Also very noticeable on the palate. Not only is there that black pepper aroma, our taste can also relate to a woody aspect to the smell, particularly sandalwood. So it's not exactly the same as, this should not be confused with something oaky. It's more of a like aromatic sandalwood, cedar wood would be another good one. There's some earthy aspect to this, as well as incense sticks that can have this aroma. White pepper, now white pepper, as in the actual white peppercorns, they will smell a bit different from black peppercorns. But in terms of wine, there isn't any difference because they're both caused by the same compound. And that compound is called rotendone. I'll show it on the next slide. It's found both in white pepper and in black pepper, and it's found in wine. But it's more of a habit that with red wines, we use the descriptor black pepper. With white wines, we use the descriptor white pepper. But they, like, if you look at it chemically, they're not any different. Patchouli is a perfume ingredient. You might know what that smells like. It also contains rotendone. So rotendone, also a primary aroma and flavor associated with a specific variety, and that is Syrah. So Syrah produces it in very high levels, much higher than than most of the famous other red grape varieties. Rotendone can be noticed in the grape itself when it is ripening in the vineyard, but it needs some very specific conditions for it to be noticeable. And that is sunlight exposure. Also shadier conditions will give you more of the black pepper aroma, as well as cooler climate. Okay, now you can basically categorize climate in cool, moderate, warm, and hot. And Syrah does well in the moderate, warm, and hot climates. It doesn't really like the very cool climates. But if it is struggling a bit to ripen, and that is in moderate climates, there you will get some black pepper formation. Okay, so it's mostly the moderate climate Syrah. Now you will find those in the Northern Rhone, for example. So famous appellations like Côte-Rôtie, Hermitage, Saint-Joseph, they can have noticeable black pepper aromas. And you might see it in New World as well. If they like those Syrahs from New Zealand, for example, they can be the climate can be a bit cooler there. But also some Australian regions where there is some altitude, regions like the Grampians or the Pyrenees, they will produce very peppery Syrah. It develops somewhat later in the ripening cycle of the grape, which you might remember from a couple of slides back when we were plotting how the aroma develops during grape ripening. And then indeed, if you pick a bit later, you will always get a bit more of that rotendone in your Syrah. Okay. I'm going to skip this for now just to keep the pace a bit higher, and moving on to number 6. No aroma difference. Example 6. So what I've presented here is an acid. You've made the addition of tartaric acid, and that is something you can only pick up by taste. It does not contribute to smell. So let's talk about a couple of acids that can be present in wine. The main one is tartaric acid, and you find it in red wines, you find it in white wines. Other examples of acid are malic acid and lactic acid. Malic acid is formed in the grape as well. Lactic acid is produced by bacteria during malolactic conversion. And tartaric is during grape ripening a bit more of a stable acid. And what that means is that it's not really that much affected by temperature, and it keeps pretty constant. If you compare that with malic acid, that is much less constant. So that is actually dropping off when temperatures are higher during grape ripening. But tartaric acid is more stable. Also, in the winery, you will see that tartaric acid is not going to be touched by microbes, but malic acid is. So malic acid is converted into lactic acid during malolactic fermentation, but tartaric acid remains untouched. That also makes this the popular acid of choice if you want to add it during winemaking. So you might want to add a little bit of acid, for example, if you have a warm year and acid levels are a bit too low. You might have thought about the other 5 aromas we've discussed so far. Would there be any winemakers that just add those aromas? And so say they buy a little bit of Rotendone and add it to their Syrah to make it smell a bit more attractive. That is not permitted. So winemakers are not allowed to add aroma compounds to their wine. So what we're doing here is obviously for educational purposes, and it's not for like then selling wines later. But tartaric acid is actually something that you're allowed to add. So the winemaker can make this addition, and it can be frequently used, especially in warmer vintages. With the other aroma compounds, say Rotendone, let's take it as an example again. It will be quite tricky to prove where. So if you say wine is high Rotendone and you analyze it, you confirm there's Rotendone in there. You cannot really tell by chemical analysis whether that was added by the winemaker or whether it was naturally formed by the grape. So those two are the same thing. But generally, winemakers have very high pride in their work, and they wouldn't really mess around with adding aromas. Anyway, so yeah, tartaric acid can be a common addition. It's one of the 5 basic taste sensations. Now, just to get a myth out of the way, acidity is not really located in any part of the tongue specifically. So sometimes you see the left scheme in textbooks where they claim that different parts of the tongue are responsible for picking up different taste sensations. That does not seem to be the case, and the one on the right is actually way more accurate, where it is showing that yes, we do have a greater density of taste receptors on the tip of our tongue, but those receptors can pick up all 5 taste sensations. Okay, so in the front you can taste salty, sweet, sour, bitter, umami. You can taste all of those here. Okay. You see in the middle, there's a bit of a less density, so we don't have that many receptors here. But yes, all of the 5 sensations, including acidity, are perceived on all sides of the tongue. We're going to move on to number 7, and for that we need to empty 2 glasses again and make some space so that we can pour the next 2. Now, by the way, while I'm doing this, I've been thinking about the format of my webinars, and I know that many of you are following dry and others are tasting along with the kit. And going forward, I'm going to change the format a little bit, because I feel like if you are not tasting along, then this is kind of slow because you have to wait while I'm preparing the samples. And on the flip side, if you're tasting along, then it might actually go way too fast. So for going forward, I'm going to be releasing a webinar that are either completely dry, so there's no samples to be tasted along, and if you are tasting, then I will record separate material where you can taste along. And I can see there's a hand raised, which means that maybe somebody has a question. Hopefully you can put the answer, or you can post your question in the chat. I think this should work. Otherwise, you can always contact me by email. Anyway, so it's 7 and 8 that we've prepared now. And 7 is the aroma of vanilla. A little bit of a one-dimensional smell, I'll put it that way. It's a pleasant smell, but most people just agree on that vanilla descriptor. And then there's some secondary, like custard ice cream. There's some clove, whiskey, and smoky notes as well. We've arrived at the secondary aromas and flavors, and those are the flavors that are formed after fermentation, so during the so-called winemaking techniques. And in the context of red wine, that is mostly going to be oak aging. So this is indeed an oak-derived flavor. Let's talk about wood. And wood doesn't really smell of vanilla by itself, but it is the heating process, which in the context of barrel making is going to be toasting, that creates the vanilla flavor. And let's talk about a couple of factors. And just some basic ones. Barrel size, that means that the smaller the barrel is, the greater the exchange of the vanilla flavor with the wine. If you have new oak, you will get more vanilla flavor compared with older oak. So in other words, casks that you have used before. And then I want to talk about wood origin as well. And oftentimes oak is split into American oak and French oak. And if you compare the two, you have to know how they grow. Now, in America, typically growing conditions are a bit warmer compared with France. What that results in, the oak tree will grow a bit faster. And a faster growth results in a wood structure that is a bit more porous. So it's a bit more open, if you like. Now, that in turn will give you faster flavor extraction. Okay, so there's going to be more transfer from aroma from the cask into the wine. Now, compare that with French oak, and growing conditions are cooler, which resulting in a slower growth of the oak tree, which makes the structure much more dense or compact. Okay. And then there's not going to be that much flavor exchange between the wood and the wine, resulting in lower flavors. Now, that applies to the vanilla flavor, but also to some of the other oak flavors like cloves or coffee that I will show in a little bit. So that is the main thing of American oak. However, there's also a specific aroma associated with American oak. And let's jump to that, actually, which is number 8. And I'm going to just reveal that straight away. And that is the coconut aroma, okay? So obviously Pina Colada, Bounty, Malibu are some products that have dominant coconut flavors. Dill, interesting. You wouldn't think that it has much in common with coconut, but indeed they both share the same compounds. Bourbon, sun cream, and shampoo are also often coconut flavored, okay? And bourbon is actually a type of whiskey that is always made using American oaks, okay? So it's an American type of whiskey. And indeed, this is the one aroma that we consistently associate with American oak, much more than French oak. Now, to get some like confusion out of the way, I'm gonna I'm just gonna skip a couple of slides and move over here to the oak molecules. Now, the vanilla aroma, that is caused by a compound called vanillin. Okay, so here on the left, you can see top to bottom some aroma molecules or aroma compounds. So vanilla, coconut, cloves, chocolate, smoke, and coffee. Now, what you can see with American oak, it will be high in everything. Okay, so it should be fairly intuitive here. The more pluses, the more aroma it contributes. So American just has more of everything compared with French oak, but especially the coconut flavor. Now, within French, you can actually discriminate between the pedunculate and the sessile oak, where pedunculate is the most neutral. Okay, so it contributes a less aroma, and then the sessile oak has a bit more of the coconut and the cloves flavor. The toasting process in wine results in especially more vanillin, also some others like chocolate, but it actually removes some of the coconut flavor. So the coconut is actually the highest in a light toast barrel. Cloves one is a bit more associated with medium toast, and there's some yeast influence there as well. But for time's sake, we're going to leave that as is. Let me go back a couple of slides. And I'd actually like to ask you to blend your sample 7 and 8, okay? So you've got 7, which is the vanilla one, and then you've got 8, which is the coconut one. And then you're gonna want to pour these wines together like that, okay? And if you smell this result, it very much smells like American oak. So that is vanilla and coconut. Kind of smells like bourbon, if you know what bourbon smells like. So a bit of a better impression of what American oak really smells like rather than the compounds in isolation. Now let's dump that. We have 2 more aromas to discuss. So there should be space for 2 more. Let's pour. There we go. Now, you notice I don't rinse my glasses in between. The aroma additions are not that extreme that they will carry over from one glass to the next. So you're more than fine to just reuse your glasses. Let's move on to 9 and 10. Like that. So add a drop of 9 to one glass, add a drop of 10 to the other glass. And the dissolving is actually quite fast. So you can give that a help of just making a quick swirl. But like in a minute or less, your compound will be dissolved in a glass, and then it's ready to go. This is the chocolate smell. Very much a dark chocolate smell. So we're thinking like 85% chocolate bars, if that makes sense. So can also remind you of cocoa, especially when you taste it. It's almost like cocoa powder. It's almost like that dry sensation of cocoa powder in your mouth. Something a bit damp, earthy about it. Roasted, burnt characteristics, a bit like a barbecue or grill. And this indeed is a compound that is formed during the toasting. So let's talk about toasting again, which I've also created a slide for, which is shown over here. This must happen with barrel production for every barrel because it bends straight oak staves into shape, okay? So when you're preparing your staves from the tree, they will be straight, but this heating process from the inside bends it nicely into shape, also seals the barrels. And this can be varied by the cooper or the manufacturer of oak. And it will be, like say, a light toast could be something like 30 minutes, and then a high toast more like 15 minutes. So that will be more of the ballpark. And this can be comparable to how we roast coffee beans as well. That could be a nice analogy. So they also come in light, medium, and high toasts. And espresso beans are an example of a high toast. Now, barrels are prepared in the same way. Okay, so light, medium, some even do medium plus toast and then a high toast. And as a winemaker, you can then purchase your barrels. High toasts tend to be super popular with the varieties that have a bit more greater aromatic or flavor intensity. So examples could be a Zinfandel or a Cabernet Sauvignon. They can often feature those chocolate notes because the winemaker has chosen a more high toast to age those wines. A medium toast could be something more like white wines are more popularly aged in a medium toast. So yeah, high toast flavor. Skip this for now, and we're going to try number 10. Pretty interesting smell that goes in a couple of directions. And we're going to call it leather going forward. There's also a smoky aspect, a bit like smoky bacon. Something fruity like dried fruit, specifically banana, maybe slightly overripe banana. Bacon, clove, fig. There's something medicinal, overripe fruit. This seems to cover it pretty well. So goes in different directions. This is a tertiary flavor. Okay, so all of these descriptors are more associated with an aged wine. Now, when we're bottle aging wine, there's a few things in terms, like basically an aroma can do 3 things during bottle aging. Either it can degrade, it can disappear, or it can remain constant, or it can increase. Now, examples of aromas that disappear are esters. Okay, so the fruity aromas, they tend to fade when we bottle age wines. Some compounds are really stable. And an example of this one is 4EG. It's a highly stable compound. So that's the leather one. There's also a couple of examples of like oxidative flavors or specific ones such as the petrol compound in Riesling, which is more of a white wine flavor, they can exponentially increase during bottle aging. But a lot of them are stable, but they still appear stronger during bottle age because of the fruit flavors that are disappearing. Okay? So bear with me. This compound is formed mostly during maturation while the wine is still in the winery. It may not be immediately apparent upon bottling, but then as primary aromas fade, this aroma then becomes much more noticeable. We know that when there is Brettanomyces activity, that there's more concentrations of 4-EG. Okay, Brettanomyces is a type of wild yeast, and where it feels very comfortable is in a barrel. Bread can live in a barrel, and whenever you get barrel age, you can expect slightly higher levels of 4-EG. Ambient fermentation is one of those other ones. Now, if you've attended one of my Pfalz classes, you will know that Brettanomyces can produce pretty nasty flavors as well. Okay, it can produce band-aid, vomit, blue cheese type of flavors. So not necessarily complementary to wine, but this is an example of a bit more of a positive contribution that bread can make to wine. Now, anecdotally, this you can find this in like Rioja, Old World Pinot Noir, and can be a pretty useful aroma to get good at, and you can use that to judge age. Okay, so just to wrap up, the PowerPoint presentations of this presentation are to be found on my website. If you open the menu on the top right, you can find the study materials, and then it is sorted into white wine flavors, red wine flavors, and wine faults. So here you can access the PowerPoint slides and download them, okay? I have an Instagram channel. You might be familiar with it because I've promoted this webinar on Instagram, but please follow me if you're interested in more content, so weekly educative videos and posts. On my website, you can also find my full event schedule, where you can find in-person courses and my online courses, tasting kits, such as the one pictured here, and the files that I've used in this presentation can also be ordered through the online store. Now, as I briefly mentioned during the presentation, going forward, I'm going to change the webinar format slightly. The next one is going to be on the 8th of December, and it's going to cover the topic of cultural differences in perception of wine flavor. Okay, so how, say, a European palate might differ from an Asian palate, and backed up with some data that I've collected during courses. The webinar is going to be 30 minutes, so it's going to be a bit more concise than what we've been doing today, and it will be a dry webinar, okay? So no tasting samples involved, just to keep the pace a bit high, and I will release separate material that you can use for tasting along, okay? Just because I'd rather not have half of the people tasting along and half not, because it's going too fast for one half of the participants and too slow for the other half of the participants. Okay, so hence the choice to change the webinar format slightly. As mentioned, this will be uploaded onto YouTube. I will be online now for a few more minutes to answer any questions that might pop up. And other than that, thank you so much for attention. I hope you have a great day. Cheers.